Well, this is one of my favorite activities that we have in the area of research and scholarship in the Kathy Hughes School of Communications. And this year I am so pleased that we have two books that we are showcasing tonight. Our first book is Social Media, Culture, and Identity that was edited by Doctors Kabuma Langmia and Tia Tyree in the Department of Strategic, Legal, and Management Communications. They also have several authors of the book chapters that will be here today to talk with us. And these individuals, actually, two of them are newly appointed doctors. So I'm just going to go through and do a little intro of those of the faculty first, and then Dr. Tia Tyree is going to talk a little more about our new doctors who have chapters written in the social media book. The first author of Social Media, Culture, and Identity that we'll hear from today is Dr. Tia C.M. Tyree, who is a professor in the SLMC department. Her research interests include African American and female representations in the mass media, hip hop, and rap reality television, film, and social media. She has published articles and book chapters in several journals and books. And some of her previous book publications include The Interesting and Incredibly Long History of American Public Relations. She is co-editor of the HBCU Experience, the book, and The Social Media, Pedagogy and Practice, which is a premier book in the field on social media research. Another author who's on our faculty of the social media book we're featuring tonight is Professor Angela Miner. And she is an associate professor in the Department of SLMC. She also has a Juris Doctor from the University of the District of Columbia, David A. Clark School of Law. She is currently the director of the Martin Luther King Jr. Forensics Program at Howard University, which comprises an award-winning debate team and mock trial team. Our featured doctoral students from the Department of Communication, Culture, and Media Studies are now Dr. Brandell Mills, if you would just stand up, Dr. Mills, Dr. Leticia Williams, and John Louis, and I can't pronounce that last name, who is working towards finishing up his doctorate. Our second book tonight that we will feature is entitled Globalization and Cyberculture, and it's authored by Dr. Kabuma Langmia. Now, Dr. Langmia also has a chapter in the social media book, but he decided that he would focus on his own sole-authored book tonight. Dr. Langmia is a Fulbright scholar, professor, and chair of our Department of Strategic, Legal, and Management Communications. He publishes in the areas of intercultural communications, social media, and information communication technology. His book is the first of its kind to thoroughly engage with the broad impacts of Western cyberculture and its neo-colonial impacts on Africa. And again, that book is entitled Globalization and Cyberculture. He is also a co-author of the Social Media Pedagogy and Practice, the premier book on social media. And he and Dr. Tia Tyree are the ones who plan our social media conference every year. And I think this was our fourth year? Sixth year. Oh, okay. So going on the seventh year. So we really have a phenomenal program here planned for you tonight, and I know you will enjoy having an opportunity to hear from our authors and also to engage with them, because after they do a brief synopsis of their books, I'm going to give them 15 minutes each, then we'll engage questions at the end. Okay, so at this time, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Tyree.
Well, thank you so much for coming. It's truly a pleasure to be here amongst our community and peers and students and the esteemed deans. I will say to you that I guess maybe 8 years ago now, I got a telephone call from a gentleman who was working at Bowie by the name of Kabuma Langmia, who said, you know, this social media is going crazy. We have to do something about it. And in all my infinite wisdom, I said, Kabuma, it's true, and I'm busy. I have no idea what we should do about it. We have to do a conference. We must do a conference. And of course, he talked me into it, and we ended up doing a conference. And it was a modest conference the first year or two, even. But it has grown to something we're very proud of. It's sort of getting to a point where it's a well-oiled machine. And I think once we got it to a point where it was feeling easy, someone said, Tia, we have to do something about this. All of this research is just going out the door. No one hears it after we leave. We should do a book. And then we did the first book. And it was wonderful because, again, we had this research. The wonderful things were happening at the conference, but people were walking away, and it was just kind of getting lost. And so the first book was Pedagogy and Practice, and it was wonderful. And within 2 years, 2 conferences later, we have the second book. And so we are churning out what I think is consistently groundbreaking research, and not constrained by what you often see in journals, by topic and by expertise. So it's been wonderful to go through this process. It's been wonderful to bring authors along with us through this journey. And this time we were able to bring a few of our CCMS doctoral students through the journey with us. And I know some people think, well, of course, you let them have a chapter. We don't let anybody have anything. They worked very hard, and I think we should get them a T-shirt that says, I survived Dr. Tyree's editing process and made it to the book. It'll be a really long T-shirt. But they did a wonderful job. And actually, Leticia has 2 chapters, and Brendel worked on one, and they worked on one together. So it's going to kind of be, you know, you can come up together both times. But I'm very proud that we have CCMS students who are not just in the classroom doing wonderful things, that they're actually producing scholarly work in journals, in books, and they're working very hard to prove that they are real scholars even before they get the official title. So for that, we're very proud of you. I've asked each of them to get a little pinpoint of something very special in their chapters to read for us today. So I'll ask maybe the 2 of you to come up first because you shared one, and then we'll ask you to do something. So I will read the title of the one article with Leticia, actually myself and another student, sponsored by Noah Grant, we should say that aloud. How minorities use social media during weather-related crisis, results of a U.S. National Weather Survey.
Good afternoon, everyone. Testing. So I'm going to read the first paragraph in the conclusion of the chapter, and it essentially kind of wraps up the findings, and it kind of synthesizes what we found and how it can be used for future research. Despite a general use of social media, minorities did not utilize social media as the most beneficial source of information about weather-related crises. The majority of Blacks and Latinos did not rely on traditional media during severe weather, specifically television, cable, and satellite television, and radio. In addition to traditional media, minorities depended on family and friends for news, weather updates, and information about emergency preparedness. Although minorities did not consider social media as the most valuable source of information, online news outlets were the most beneficial than social networking sites, blogs, and content communities. Furthermore, Latinos did not use social media moderately more than Blacks and considered social media to be a more beneficial resource than Blacks.
And the kind of, I guess the baseline for that chapter, which is really important, is you just have to think about Hurricane Katrina. And when you're thinking about Hurricane Katrina, you know that many of the African Americans ignored the weather warnings. And they really did rely on their social networks and not the Facebook social networks, their family, their friends around them, to try to figure out whether this was serious or not, whether they should take action. And so that was a long time ago. And now when you consider what happens now with social media, are people still depending on those interpersonal relationships? Are they looking at social media? And the truth is, people are still looking at the interpersonal relationships, but they're not turning on the television anymore, so they're turning their interest into looking at the same news sources online. So it is interesting to say that, yes, you still have to touch African Americans through their interpersonal relationships, even in 2015 or 2016. So if we can just come up again. There was a wonderful article about cyberbullying. And again, this topic is very relevant today. I was actually just asked to go to a middle school earlier last month and do a chat about cyberbullying. And I can tell you now that middle schoolers have no idea of the seriousness of what they say and what they do using their phones. And I was told that usually whenever there's an instance of cyberbullying, it always now involves something that happened using a cell phone. And so this is a real important topic.
So John Louis and I actually conducted a panel for the social media conference about cyberbullying, and our interest was stimulated through the lack of research about social media and occurrences of cyberbullying. And so our study did a meta-analysis, which was basically just an analysis of all the available research on cyberbullying, and looked for consistent themes throughout the research.
So I'm just gonna go ahead and read the conclusion for you guys. Essentially, just like Dr. Tyree just said, we found out that most of the issues that had to do with cyberbullying happened online, but some of them started on the playground through the usage of the technology and then continued online because it's never ending and it's limitless in the nature of the fact that the content stays up forever, pretty much. Research analyzing cyberbullying on social media increasingly reveals that this area of study cannot be disregarded or underdeveloped. However, this meta-analysis found that scholars have only begun to investigate the occurrences and consequences of this phenomenon, resulting in challenges in the methodological approach. No universal definition of cyberbullying that is applicable to social media, and a lack of consistent data regarding the role of gender in cyberbullying that is indicative of problems with major findings. Despite these challenges, this meta-analysis also identified potential in multidisciplinary scholarship that demonstrates that the need for interdependent research across academic disciplines such as technology, communication, education, and psychology. Overall, the current landscape of research about cyberbullying on social media is mediocre due to the combination of challenges and multidisciplinary potential of the research. So we really want to encourage people who are from different backgrounds and different scholarships to think about what it is that cyberbullying represents and means for the current day and age. We want to encourage people in the psychology field, in the education field, even people who are computer engineering majors, because they are the ones creating the technology that they're using to conduct these things, to think about this issue, and then together we can collaborate and find solutions.
I'll ask our esteemed attorney minor to come up. You were previously introduced. And what I will say is there are so many things that happen on the internet, I should say, or with our smartphones. And there are so many taboo subjects that people just don't want to talk about. And definitely, I think we still have to talk about them. And one thing is sexting, and then sexting among minors becomes just a Pandora's box that we just keep trying to shut. And I was pleased that we have an attorney who was willing to, kind of peel back the layers of that problem and share it through her chapter. So, Professor Mike.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to be before you today. I am still in private practice and still in academia, and this problem came through my office. And I said, well, let me merge the two and discuss and write about it. And the research came from a place that when child pornography laws were written, they were written primarily for children and the protection thereof. They were not written for children to actually be the people or the persons that were going to be prosecuted. So there is this reemergence of, or reconstruction, if you will, of the law that needed to be understood. And that, to me, was a good place to bring in some research. I wanted to also read the conclusion, because I think that also goes to the overall work and empirical data that was collected. Just it gives the gist of the chapter. The goal is to punish the behavior of minors without the potential threat of a criminal record or criminal prosecution. Similarly, without registering minors as sex offenders, with the exception of some cases. As an educator, online websites are in abundance and are warning minors and teenagers about the dangers of posting nude photographs, but that has not served as a deterrence against sexting, cyberbullying, and cyberstalking. A candid talk to the youth through online forums is one form of education. Students need classes, conferences, peers, workshops to express themselves to adults and politicians on why teenagers feel the need or pressure to send nude or exotic photographs. In a Kim Kardashian society, peer pressure and nudity in photographs and videos are glorified, which makes it even more of a challenge to educate teenagers against this type of behavior. So the other thing that sparked this body of research is there is a growing field of minors that are now having to register as sex offenders. There's also a growing field of what is called the Junior Sex Offender Registry. Now, some of it is warranted, but there is a place on the internet that these students, or maybe sometimes, and also revenge porn is also coming into the play, and where, you know, you may have a boyfriend or a girlfriend, and if you're mad at the boyfriend, or the boyfriend is mad at the girlfriend, and the girlfriend has sent a nude picture, he sends it out to the whole football team, and that whole dissemination is a problem. But it's been a place where teenagers are getting criminal records before they even applying to any college campus or even filling out a college application. And the law right now says that if an adult is actually taking pictures of a minor and disseminating and spreading that picture out, they should be prosecuted. The law on the books now was never intended for a minor to distribute pictures of a minor. And I think that that's something, hopefully, that as we talk about cyberbullying, cyber stalking, that sexting will reemerge and be reconstructed. So thank you for your time.
So I'll talk to you a little bit now about my research. And again, most of my research is about African American or female representations in media, and I've morphed that into now looking more at social media. And because I love reality television, I also study reality television. I had heard the word thought one too many times on a reality television scene, and I also, again, study rap too, and of course it's all over rap. And I said, well, I had it. I was over it pretty quickly, because part of it was that no one really understood what it meant, and no one really had constructed the thought yet. And so it worried me that it would continue, which it still has, without someone really understanding or taking a moment for people to say, well, what is it, and what does it mean, other than the thought being that hoe over there, which is what the acronym stands for, but what does it really mean? And so I embarked in looking at Twitter and Instagram posts, and seeing how people constructed the thought. And I actually worked on it with a former CCMS grad student, now think about it, Morgan Kirby, and she was actually one of my students, and it's always wonderful to kind of reach back and bring forward a student. So I will take license and read one paragraph prior to the conclusion, and then a little bit of the conclusion, because I think just this one sentence gives you an understanding of what I uncovered. And I think there's something hilarious in this book that if you are into pop culture, you would love. On page 15, there's definitions related to the word thought. So there's thoughts, thought lives, thoughties, thoughtdom, thoughtish, thoughty, scripper, thought diaries, thought fit, thoughtisms, thoughtastic, and thought got. So if you ever want to know anything about thoughts, I got it all covered for you. But it says, regardless, women labeled as a thought are perhaps some of the most disliked and disregarded in hip-hop culture. Loathed by males and females, thoughts were voiceless and targeted by users who used them as the subject of criticism and critiques at the behest of others. Examples of poor behavior and lifestyle choices and the punchlines of jokes, especially in memes. And then I'll just take you over here. It says, one of the effects of discourse when it takes place on social media and through CMC is that those who engage in a given discourse ultimately control narratives. In many cases, these narratives are adopted as social truths. All of the tweets and images used in the sample assign negative images and meaning to the concept of thought. In this study, no social media user offered a counter narrative to the negative images of the thought. In fact, both male and female social media users viewed thoughts in the same unfavorable and demeaning perspective. The creation of a counter narrative is to reject and debunk the current conversation about the thought must be explored in the future. Ultimately, by observing different forms of CMC, it is determined social media usage aided in the widespread use and acceptance of the term thought. This study's findings support the idea that social media users have the power to create narratives, which are products of both social identities and the social construction of reality produced on social media sites. Just as they are created through basic forms of human communication, CMC are widespread tools used in everyday life that allow anyone with the intent and the time to spread what is negative, damaging stereotype about women. It is necessary to protect young girls and women from being targeted and labeled in this derogatory way. The impact is real, the consequences can be devastating, and the content of tweets, memes, and posts can live on forever in cyberspace. So with that, I think we're done.
Thank you, Dr. Tyree. At this time, I'm going to turn the mic over to Dr. Kabuma Langmia to talk about his sole-authored book. And I'm sure that you're going to enjoy this discussion. And at the end of his presentation, we'll have an opportunity for you to ask questions of our authors.
Good afternoon. I think it was Homi K. Barber, an F. Rothenberg Professor of Humanities at Harvard, who says in Frank Fanon's Wretched of the Earth, and I quote, "Globalization is staring at the nation through the back mirror." I repeat, globalization is staring at the nation through the back mirror. The journey that I undertook to solve this puzzle started when I read the special edition of Journal of Communication, 1983. There was the 1993 edition, but I'm specifically talking about the 1983 edition, I beg your pardon. In that edition, authors of the articles were challenging communication scholars to redefine the constant changing nature of the communication discipline. To them, the mass communication paradigm was in crisis. That crisis deepened when I subsequently read Annie Lang. Annie Lang is a distinguished professor of telecommunications and cognitive science at Indiana University, Bloomington. When I read her article titled "Discipline in Crisis," the shifting paradigm in mass communication research that appeared in the Communication Theory Journal in 2013. This is exactly 30 years after the ferment of the field article that I talked to you about. 30 years with internet revolution and social media have compounded this crisis today. So it is left for us, scholars in communication, to conduct research and publish materials to resolve this crisis. And as we publish materials and conduct research to resolve this crisis, can we then provide answers to the overwhelming question raised by Anilang in 2013? And that question is, does the mass communication discipline have a paradigm? If yes, what is it? What is it? Thomas Kuhn is the Baobab scholar of the scientific revolution. He came up with 3 fundamental questions about paradigm in social science. Number 1, what is the nature of your discipline? And in our own case, communication. 2, based on our fundamental nature of your discipline, which is communication, can we therefore devise new ways to tackle its changing nature? And lastly, what are the overwhelming questions raised by your discipline, and in our case, communication, new media and old media, in the age of internet revolution? What is the relationship? I have attempted the answers in this book. And like scholars 30 years ago who have been conducting and publishing research, I have attempted answers in this book in order to resolve the crisis of, does mass communication discipline have a paradigm? In Globalization and Cyberculture, published by Paul Grave Macmillan simultaneously in the United Kingdom and the United States, I sought out to respond to the critics. First, with Homi K. Baba, which I mentioned to you, the Harvard professor, who said globalization was staring at the nation through the back mirror, I decided to tilt the mirror to face the front, so that globalization can face the nations on the African continent. And to respond to Anilang, the telecommunication professor at Indiana University, who said, does mass communication have a paradigm? I decided to use the Afrocentric perspective, paradigmatic lens, to tackle the cybercultural communications on the African continent in this book. Whether we like it or not, I believe wholeheartedly in Dr. Margaret Yard. Dr. Margaret Yard is an assistant professor of psychiatry at Lehman College, City College of New York. I believe in her 2010 article titled Cyber World, the Colonization of Intersubjectivity. Among other things in that article, and I quote verbatim, in the age of internet revolutions, we are now living in a post-personal world where our lives have all become a database. End of quote. Yes, our lives have all become a database. I've been wrestling with that charge in this book. I just want to read a few of the table of content. Introduction, traditional African and Western modern cultures, cyber culture, cyber subculture and Africa, road to cyber culture in tropical Africa, requiem for in-person verbal and non-verbal communication. And I want to pause. For those who wrote the blurb for this book, those who had to review it for it to be published. You have Molefi Kente Asante, who is the father of Afrocentricity. He gave me a caveat that before I endorse your book, I've read it, but you have to change sub-Saharan Africa to tropical Africa. And I said, why? He said, there is no Africa sub of the Sahara. That sub is pejorative, designed by the Arabs. And I went on my research and I realized it was true. That's why I changed this chapter to tropical Africa. New media, new cultural dependence, cyber culture and the digital divide, cyber culture and identity. Chapter 9, cybernetic psychosyndrome. Chapter 10, cyber security, cyber culture and Africa. Chapter 11, cyber culture and e-health communication in Africa. And of course, the conclusion. Read a section for you. The discussion on cyber culture does not include what Lister et al. 2003 called artificial intelligence, network programming. Rather, it approaches this topic from a human virtual 24-hour omnipresent perspective. They proceed in their argument by stating that technology affects human culture, unquote. Indeed, it does. And that is why the post-colonial new media electronic communication interface has transformed the human-to-human oral communication that was oftentimes referred to as face-to-face communication. I have told my students I no longer use the term face-to-face communication. They are seated here, the doctoral students. When you say face-to-face communication, you confuse me. What is Skype? What is FaceTime? What is teleconference? Is that not face-to-face? So we had to replace this term to in-person communication. Many scholars, including James Carey and Harold Innis, have agreed with this. James Carey described how Harold Innis views media intrusion into nascent culture by stating that, unquote, the increasing facility with which electronic media penetrated national boundaries worried Innis, because it increased the capacities of imperialism and cultural invasion. Innis considered monopolies, whether for electronic technology or, for that matter, rigid orthodoxy, threat to human freedom and cultural survival. Rattan in 2005 has also shared this sentiment in this book, The Media and Globalization, that homogenization of culture is due to globalization of the media that is largely driven and monitored Western media organizations. There are two schools of thought nowadays. Globalization is a disguised form of imperialism. There are other scholars who say there are two forms of globalization. Globalization from above and globalization from below. When I published an article in the Journal of Third World Countries titled China as the New Colonial Master of Africa, I was attacked by Chinese scholars. Because I view this as a top-bottom and not a bottom-up process. I never responded. Again, what I'm trying to do here is for us to look at this term globalization, localization, imperialism, colonization, de-westernization, and westernization. Now, doctoral students are sitting here. I used to frown that when you harvest Western theories to plant them on the soil of black experience or Africa, you're doing the wrong thing. Let's challenge the concept. I said, all right, challenge me. I'm not a demigod of knowledge. Bring it on. Interestingly, we'll be meeting in San Diego for the ICA, International Communication Association, to advance this debate. Because in October, when I was in Kenya, Nairobi, When this book was not yet published, I was in a panel with Westerners and a few North Americans and Africans. And I said, the fact that I live in North America does not mean that I have uprooted my root from the mother of all continents, which is Africa. And so I challenged the idea of this Western theory and said there is something called black communication theory. And that is the next book that is coming out. And I have others like Olivia Sante that are contributing chapters and Amma Mazama. These are gurus who are trying to change the paradigm. Again, I'm responding to the 1983 call for responsibilities by communication scholars. When I find myself here at Howard, the mecca of black scholarship, I have to do something. That's why I'm here. Western media, using their own languages, have invaded native languages spaces in most developing countries. And the fear espoused by Ennis is vindicated in the 21st century. Nascent cultures in Africa are being deracinated as a result of Western technology, unapologetic intrusion. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you so much, Dr. Langmia, Dr. Tia Tyree, Professor Angela Miner, and our doctoral students, John Louis and Letitia, Dr. Letitia Williams, and Dr. Brandell. I don't have my sheet in front of me, my sheet. See, these are new PhDs. I've got to get used to saying that. But it's really a wonderful opportunity for us now to engage with the authors and ask questions. And you have really heard from the cream of the crop tonight in terms of the next generation of thinkers on some of these very new issues that we're grappling with. Cyberbullying, sex texting, and all the other issues that we see in social media, and certainly with Dr. Langmia's book on globalization and cyber culture. So at this time, we're just going to open it up for questions. This is really a dynamic interchange between our authors and audience. So feel free to just ask questions on any of the books or topics that are related. Okay, don't be bashful. I know there's some burning questions out there.
I'll start it off.
Okay.
Can I even start it off? I wanted to mention 3 chapters in the book that I found so interesting, and every time I read them, I was really moved by the content. And the first one I read, it looks at the issue of transgender bathroom use, and it was such a relevant topic, and it's something that no one's really thinking about, I believe, in the scholarly world. And it's funny because as we were going through this year-long process, laws were being introduced and they were changing. And I almost thought, you're writing about it, but they fixed it. So, and then Trump came into office, and then he immediately reversed the exact laws that he was writing about in the chapter. So it's really intriguing. It looks at how people will go into the bathrooms and take selfies and say that I don't belong in this bathroom, I belong in the one that I assigned. So it's a very interesting chapter. Another one I wanted to talk about was about a young woman, a young mother in India. And she went to the hospital, and she didn't have a very positive experience. And she just sent an email to friends and family. Hey, I was trying to get my test results, and they didn't give it to me. It's so frustrating, and if you ever have to go to whatever the hospital is, you shouldn't go because it's just a mess. Just to her family and friends. Well, that email got forwarded and forwarded and forwarded, so much so that it became viral, and the hospital sued and got her taken to jail for slander on a very personal email communication that she had with her family. And, of course, it was national news in India, and there was this huge campaign called Coins for Maya, and everyone rallied behind her. They posted her bail, and she finally got out, but they said, we're going to fine you now for what you do. You can get out of jail, but we're going to fine you. And they literally went around, to the farmers and everyone, and they all gave her fine in little coins. So what I thought was amazing is that they galvanized, but to just stick it to the system, they all paid it in change. And I thought it was a wonderful story in how they collected that money. And another one I think you could probably chime in on, the traditions in Africa dealing with chiefs, right? And how you have to communicate in villages, and how there's a process. And it all involves, you want to do it?
Yeah. Right. When I was a Fulbright scholar in the University of Buea in Cameroon, so I met with faculty members who were eager to publish abroad. They wanted their manuscript to be published abroad, and they've been having these difficulties. And I said, all right, the difficulties because of lack of literature, lack of resource materials, lack of challenge in most of your articles. So I'm going to help you out, but before I do that, you have to commit to doing the work. Because as my co-editor was saying, we will not just handpick a chapter and publish. So there was this paper, in fact, about how social media is changing the in-person communication among the funds. Funds are like the kings in the northwest part of Cameroon. At first, you don't just go directly to them. You have to pass through intermediaries to communicate, because, of course, these are people who are revered. But because of social media, people sit here in the United States and in London and just call the king directly on the phone. And the king accepts. And so the other intermediaries, they are now losing their roles because they can no longer communicate, because the phone says, I know about it already. So they don't have a job, they don't have a role. So they are actually challenging the role of social media in this kind of setup. Because tradition, again, coming back to Harold Innis, the Canadian scholar which I mentioned, what are we doing with this kind of intrusion into cultural fabric of a people, thousands and thousands of years? How are we integrating this social media within the context of this in-person communication? That's a challenge that is being raised in this chapter. And of course, through a lot of revision, we were able to accept that chapter. And of course, I left it with my co-editor, because at least I didn't want to be a little bit using my mother continent sympathy to say, okay, we'll accept it. And she grilled them. I think they revised that chapter, 14 times. No, it worked. One thing you should, but one thing you should know is that because the publishers were also on our neck. Because one thing you should know about publishing is that there are external reviewers who have no clue about what you are talking about. And they're just looking for errors and weaknesses. No, honestly. And so the first of all, grill us there, we had to challenge. She remembered I had to call. I had to even write some lengthy letter to at least describe the culture on the mother continent, just to educate. And that is the issue of this cyber-cultural communication. Because unless, and I tell my students, you go there, go to Kenya, go to Nairobi, go to Kampala, go to Nigeria, and feel it. You will take things for granted. You stay here and edit their paper and think this is rubbish. Go there, feel it, see what it is. Thank you.
All the way in the back, I just see the hand.
My name is Divine Anye. I'm a national security expert, so I look at communication and cyber in different ways. And to me, communication is the heart of us balancing national security. We have cyber, which has come and moved the dynamics a whole lot. As a communication department, I would like to know, especially if it's expressed in some way in your book, where we fit us, say, consumers, and equally those who are practitioners in enforcing laws and practices. And if we look at the fact that our mother continent, like Africa, where communication through globalization in cyber has increased productivity, economy, and all this good stuff. But now, balancing it with politics where we have dictatorial governments which either at one point turn it on or off, how does that affect us moving forward consuming technology and us who are actually enforcing, and how we balance that? And it goes across the board, communicating with the United States. All of us were sitting here and some countries were cut off for a while. Families could not connect to their families back home. And us practitioners who are actually, say, enforcing laws and things like that, we're equally caught up in the middle of international laws. How do we balance that? And at some point, you mentioned in your book where we fit and how the industry of communication or the practice of communication can leverage or create some leverage in this. I'll be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I would like to respond to this question by quoting Sheikh Anta Diop, one of the Senegalese philosophers, who said, no country can develop by using the language of another. And that's the tragedy of Africa. No country can develop by using the language of the other. The colonial masters' languages are still prevalent on the African continent. And so that is where we need to start. And I address that in the book. So when we talk about communication, we need to first of all know it is language driven. It's language driven. And when we mention the idea of digital divide, which I read just last Sunday, that we have to be careful with that term, digital divide. There is a presupposition that everybody is on the net. Some people are still on analog. So why are we even talking about digital divide? So if we are talking about cyber security, there's a presupposition that everybody's on cyber. But as he mentioned, the Anglophone Cameroonians in the southern part of Cameroon that we know today, internet was cut out by the government for 93 days because of what? The suspicion that they were going to send messages that are quote unquote disturbing to the government, to the outside world. You see? So how do you effectively carry out cyber security measures with the Boko Haram in the north, with this kind of attitude? These are the questions raised by Homi K. Baba, that globalization is staring at the nation through the back mirror. No, think about it. There are plethoras of difficulties that we face just by the fact that we are using the language of another person to communicate, my brothers and sisters. And that the indigenous languages are quote-unquote looked upon as inferior. Some people can speak it, some cannot write it. It doesn't have an international reputation, except Arabic, for instance. There's Arabic keyboard, Chinese keyboard. Which African languages has a keyboard now, my brothers and sisters? These are the challenges, which the orthography, the emails that you send, everybody's saying it, so you are liable to face some of the wrath of cybersecurity because everybody reads your messages. So language, we should start. That's why I started with Sheikh Anta Diop. Nobody can develop using the language of another. And I am writing this thing because I know very soon 6 feet I'll be down. And when 6 feet, when I go down, I know that the next generation, 70 years from today, we know that at least we tried, brothers and sisters. We tried. We attempted some answers. Yeah, we attempted.
So I teach undergrad, so I just go straight for the kill. It's your fault. It's each and every one of our faults. And I just got a brand new phone, and my old phone was just so lovely. And I had it for, can you imagine having a phone for 6 years? I kid you not. And as I got my new phone, I was reminded about the fact that it's my fault. Because when you download an app, you don't read it. It says, I'm going to do all of these things. Right? Can I do this? And you go, okay. Then you download the next one. I'm going to do all of these things. I'm going to make phone calls. I'm going to look at your pictures. I want your microphone. I want your email. Okay. And we do it. And we give them all the information. Can I get your location? Of course you can have my location. Yes, please. Tell the world who I am. We do it to ourselves. And then we say, oh, the government. They know where I am. Well, you gave Google permission. Why are you angry that the government wants to know? So we do it to ourselves. And then we get angry when someone is invading our privacy. What privacy? At what point do you want to have privacy? Because I'm confused now. And so I think we have to understand that the minute we pick up our phones, which we never really let go of, right? We give up a lot and we do it willingly. And so then when we're talking about cybersecurity and our protections, we have to be very, in my opinion, delicate about how angry we get, because we are then picking and choosing who we allow to peek behind our curtains, literally. So you want to take a picture in your bathroom and put it on your public account, but you want to have some privacy. It's pretty impossible to do so. Yes, ma'am. Yes, Dean. Provost.
Well, no, I have to, that's okay. I have a comment and then I have a question for Professor Mike. Okay. The comment is, what is that quote that you offered? You cannot use the culture,
The language.
the language of another to basically develop. And I was sitting here thinking, bell hooks.
Yes.
Hello, bell hooks. Yes. You cannot dismantle the master's house with the master's tools.
That's right. That's right.
I'm just saying, what you said was deep. This is deep. Okay. And so as I was sitting here, I said, bell hooks. I said, so a takeaway, what I'm partly taking away is I said, we have to be careful. What you're offering is you're saying, I will use the Afrocentric perspective that is grounded in the mother country to do this critique of the cyber space and its impact on globalization. Is that in essence? Okay. I needed to sit here, I'm just saying what this stuff, because I'm trying to take away what's the brother doing. That's what I'm trying to take away, so I had to say that. Now, would you want to, okay. Okay, Professor Minor, my essential question is, what is your fix? I heard what the problem is with the statutes as they currently exist in terms of looking at sexting, and that the underlying assumption is that there is an adult, probably an adult male, but let's just say an adult, who is exploiting a minor, and we're not talking about two minors. And I also heard, I thought, some non-legal ways that you were suggesting to deal with the problem. But I didn't hear, and it may be in the article, what you think the solution is for this particular problem. If you want to deal with it completely in a non-legal way, sure, or we really need to fix the statute to deal with this in some way, and if so, what?
Very good question. And I was trying to be mysterious, and I did not read what I felt.
Oh.
That I had a longer paragraph in my conclusion. But essentially, Provost, what I suggested, recommended, or proffered was, let's first reconstruct the statute. So you cannot sweep under minors in the same statute that you have promulgated, argued for sex offenders who were predators on those same minors. Okay? So if I'm Susie Think Little and I want to take pictures of my breasts and send it to my boyfriend because I really like him, I don't want to be a sex offender. So I want that opportunity to change the reconstruction of the law. Then once you do that, find the appropriate punishment, which I do believe should not put so many minors in the criminal justice system. I think I proffered, just as they get slaps on the hands for DUIs,
I proffer community service, counseling. And for those, there are some rare cases that I talked about. There's one young lady that posted over 50 nude pictures of herself on MySpace. She has an issue, and she was found as a sex offender, and she was in prison for that. But the other individuals, one was a locker room post, and somebody was playing a game on them. And it went around the school, and that's the problem. It starts off innocent, or it starts off as a game, but it went around the school, so anybody else that passed that same picture around were, under the confines of that statute, disseminating child pornography. And they were like, no, I just took a picture of her in underwear, in the locker room. Well, to them, that was provocative. So I want there to be a diversion program, if you will, that helps them understand the severity of it until we can get more research and understand why are you thinking that nudity is something that it should be so freely expressed. Before we say, well, wait a minute, before prosecutors have the liberty to just look at this one statute and say the only resolution is to send them to jail and or a sex offender registry. So I hope I answered your question. I won't be so mysterious next time. I'll put it out there. So maybe if I'm mysterious, you'll read out the entire book.
Yeah, thank you. I am happy to be here at the maker of Afro. Dr. Lambert, you say Afro what? Yeah. I talk a lot with Dr. Langmere, and we talk about what he was quoting the Senegalese philosopher to have talked about. Although the question I have most of the time is, philosophers like him said all those things, but they didn't do enough work to then get those languages to have the recognition that they deserve. Communication, I happen to come from a technical background. I'm an engineer, so we communicate in so many ways other than just language. One of the reasons why you cannot use some other person's language to develop is because if you imagine my kids, for instance, they go back to my country, they cannot talk to their grandma, they cannot talk to their grandpa. They are actually giving their library away, their archives away. Information and knowledge doesn't necessarily come from sitting in a classroom. People learn a lot of things. There are a lot of things that a grandparent know that they may have learned from them, but that is given away. So the question I have for the scholars, somebody has to start doing something about this. I know with him, I would have been happy to be talking to him in the language that I'm so comfortable talking in, because we don't normally meet and talk in another language but the language that we know. I happen not to be somebody in mass communication, or somebody has to start doing something. So what are you doing to help that situation? In the Cameroons, like you said, the Cameroons problem, I'm an Amazonian from that part of the country that's suffering from a lot of problem now. And a lot of people are not understanding a lot what's going on there. In that same country, we have two foreign cultures that came together. One of the culture is oppressing the other one. Because in the Cameroons, although I may speak this foreign language I'm speaking here, I may not participate in a lot of things going on in the country because I don't speak French. The president cannot speak English to me, and he doesn't care what I do. So he underdevelops me, even intellectually, because he's forcing me now to learn a different language and do a lot of things that I may not like to do. So now, the original language is there. What are we doing, or the scholars doing, to start getting this thing so that they can actually create African languages? Because indigenous languages, in the Cameroon space, we have minimum of 250 languages. Those languages, if they really want to create a language for that space, they will have a language with very rich vocabulary, because if linguists sit down, they can pick from the different cultures and create a language. A language that is indigenous to an area would develop that area. But speaking a foreign language, you cannot develop because you have simply given your archives away. Thank you.
All right. So let me react. This is a serious problem, and I will start with Chinua Achebe. Chinua Achebe was attacked on this issue, on writing things fall apart. And his answer was he has transliterated the English language. The grammar he's using in Things Fall Apart is not the English grammar as you and I know about it. Like when he says the moon has legs. What is that? Semantically, that is not correct. So that is the way he went around the issue of language, because it has become a brainwashing kind of thing. Francis Nyamjo has said even the education that is being impacted to the kids right now in Africa is westernized from elementary. That's brainwashing. Thomas Sankara said that, unquote, he who feeds you controls you. And that's why he got into problem with France. He who feeds you controls you. And that is the problem of Africa. So what are we doing about this? As he was saying, when I meet him, I don't use this Western language. I never use this Western language to some of my brothers and sisters sitting here. I don't, because I feel guilty. I have a problem that I know how to speak the mother tongue, the language in Africa, but I cannot write. I was not taught how to write it. How am I going to deal with that? So when I went home to bury my stepmother, and we were in a Catholic church, which is westernized, and I was called on the podium because I'm the heir to the throne when my father passed, and the priest was preaching and reading the Bible in English. But when I came up, I used the language of the people. And all the grandmas and the aunties and uncles, they all gave me a round of applause because I said, what is wrong in using this language in church? No, that is a problem we have. That we use this language as a prestige in order to pass out as Westerners. And that is what is wrong with Africans. I was insulted at the conference in Zimbabwe that what are we Africans in North America? Are we following the footpath of the West, or we are de-Westernizing in terms of language and the books we write? I said, if I write in Mungaka, which is my language, will you read it? Ngugi wa Thiong'o had an issue with this. Ngugi wa Thiong'o of Kenya, he started writing in Kikuyu. But they said if you write in Kikuyu, if you don't translate, nobody will read it. So I don't know. Let's all reason these things. It's not only for me here, still sitting here. This question is for all of us. How do we de-Westernize? In fact, I even have an article about on this issue, which came out in Communication Gazette. I raised this issue. I wrestle with it. In fact, I speak 6 languages. Of those 6 languages I speak, which include German and French, I only have 3, which is indigenous African languages, Pidgin and Mungaka. What am I to do? When I came, I saw my African American brothers who separated from me 300 years ago. I said, how many languages do you speak? 1, English language. I said, that's a Western language. What language can you and I speak together? They say, Ebonics. I said, okay, I need to learn. So we are wrestling with this thing. Nijola, this is a loaded question. We should all let us publish things on this.
I have no place in answering that question, and I won't. But what I will say is that we all have to do something with the knowledge and the space that we take up. And I think that is the beauty of being at Howard University for both of us, is that we are in a place where we can publish what we want. And not all scholars are in universities where they can publish what they want. I mean, if I talked about doing a chapter on thoughts in some universities, their eyes would glaze over and figure out how to leave quickly. So what I think we have to do, and the reason why, well, I'll tell you a story. I was in a panel discussion August, and my usual intro was done, and I did what I was supposed to do, and question and answer session happened. And a young man stood up and he said, I'd like to ask you a question. Why do you study black women? And I said, despite how I look, am a black woman. But why else? What else would I study? And he was so perplexed. I said, I should study that which I am. Because I could study so many other things, but how does that really impact me? How does that help the world? How does that change the positioning of other black women? And I am a PR professional, and I could care less about studying PR. Let somebody else do that. But for me, at Howard University, I would do nothing more than study black women and African American. That's all I want to study. And I'll take it in different places, and I'll look at Twitter, and I can look at television, and I can look at movies. I'll move around, but there's nothing more that I would rather do than to study black women. And so I think it is up to scholars like us to say, yes, we could publish more in other areas. Yes, we might be more marketable studying other things, but we should study that which we care about. And when you study that which you care about, I think you produce more. I think if we were trying to force ourselves into these other avenues, we wouldn't produce as much as we produce. But when you do what you love, you do a lot of it.
Let me just add something. We have a scholars forum that I chair every 3 p.m. on Monday with doctoral students. And the idea of homeschooling came up. Homeschooling. Amma Mazama says all African American kids should leave the public school. Yeah, that they should take all their kids from public school because they are giving them wrong education. And that they should be homeschooled. The article is out there, the journal. So I raised the question of my doctoral student. How do we do this? Where is the future? So are they not going to go to Harvard? Who is well trained to handle these issues in terms of curriculum and so on? We were wrestling with all this. We teach them about Timbuktu. We teach them about the Nile Valley. We teach them about the black pharaohs, which Louise Gates handled very well in her 3-part video, Wonders of the African World. Go and watch it, 3-part video, Wonders of the African World, which is a sequel, according to me, of Ali Mazrui, the Africans. Ali Mazrui is past, Chinua Achebe is past, things are still falling apart. You know, I don't know. Maybe we just want to make money and survive. No, I don't know. Maybe we just want to make money, live good, ride in our Homer, and live in a buy home. No, but these are issues. These are things that are haunting us. These are things that are haunting us, the black race. And we have to tackle it at Howard University, the Mecca.
Okay, my question is about when we talk about the future, we look at the present. The reality is that there is no culture that is static. Even African culture is not static. Even before the coming of Westerners to Africa, culture was changing. And essentially because culture changes, it might be argued that in coming in contact with Western culture, that is also part of that process of change. In the issue about language, the key issue to me is this. Language matters, but only because language controls our thoughts, what we can think about, what we are able to observe, and so on. That's really what language is about. And I can give you one example of my maternal grandmother. In her world, there is no color like burgundy or red. All of them are red. And we can only describe it in one way, which is non-achame men, meaning it's colored in blood. Whether it's burgundy, it doesn't matter. All she sees is one color. Okay. That's how language controls thought. If we look at this, and for us to survive in the general world where we're talking about globalization, and we are talking about cultures coming in contact with culture, meaning that even African culture must change. It's affected by it. So it's a struggle of how much of that African culture you're going to keep, because you're not going to keep 100%. Because even if he stays on his own, he's going to change. So there is an effect. And even Homi Bhabha argues that there is something called liminality of cultures, where cultures meet each other, and there is this state that is not stable, in which culture in itself is in a ferment. Okay, so I think the thought of African culture being static is not there. It's not going to be there. Even if it has no contact with Western culture, there is a process of change for every culture that occurs.
That is the argument of the hybridity scholars. Of course, yes, I tackled that in my book. But listen, I was in India in 2013. I saw a burgeoning culture. Not that they shunned Western British culture, they were living side by side, but you could see that they had some honor and dignity with their culture. I visited a McDonald's, and I noticed that it was what? It was like a transplant of the American McDonald's. But that is not what is happening in Africa. I said even the educational system in Africa is westernized from class 1. The books they read, the stories they tell, the authors they read. African authors are not even used in the classroom, apart from Chinua Achebe or Wole Soyinka. If you don't have the big name, the authorities will not even recommend those books. That's the problem with Africa, is that there's a superior culture. Go to the airport, everybody is happy to send a child to Britain, to France, to the United States. It's like a celebration. That is the problem we are saying, that we don't own and respect our own culture. And that is why it is withering. That is why it is fading, and we seem to celebrate it. Look at the youth in African cities, which are covered in my book. Look at the cell phone. I was moving the university in Boya as a Fulbright scholar, head downward. Everybody was on their Facebook, Twitter, everybody. I thought maybe they were trying to promote African culture. No, they were following Jay-Z. They were following. They were talking about. So that is we are just talking about awareness. That's what we are trying to say. It's about awareness that we too we are also capable. We are capable, and that even though we work on, that's what is happening in Asia. Look at the South Koreans. Look at some part of Nigerian culture, which I do respect. You go to their culture, everybody's dressed in the Western attire. Of course, when we talk about language, it's not only about the spoken. There's also the non-verbal. The non-verbal, our hairs, our clothing. Look at our females and their hair. It's a problem, brothers. It's a problem.
Any other questions? Yes.
I'll ask a question with respect to the big data and the mentioning that our lives are becoming databases, and what that really means, because with the smartphone, even if you're not accepting certain apps and permissions, just by visiting, it recognizes and notices that, and it pushes ideas and thoughts to you. And you may not be interested. Maybe you stumbled on something by mistake, but it thinks that's what you want. So as far as like the research that your, new PhD students and the, the gentleman, Jean-Louis, and yourself, can you expand a little bit on that phraseology? Our lives are becoming databases, and what you mean by that?
You can answer first. I can answer second.
So I think that there is, and this is an ongoing project I'm working on, actually. There's a general misconception about what it is that you do or what role you play in how that database is created. Essentially, we produce content every second. The fact that you're sitting here right now, even if you're not touching your phone, you're producing content. And that content could be in the form of how low is your battery right now. It's recorded directly and sent to Apple if you have an iPhone. How optimized the application you have on your phone are, and it's sent directly without you knowing. Geolocalization and all those things. So the role that we play, like Dr. Tyree said earlier, is by accepting without question. One of the projects I'm working on right now is understanding how the user's term and conditions apply to people regardless of where they're located. So essentially, Facebook was created here for an American market, right? But it's used everywhere in the world right now. So those terms and conditions were created for American users. But you can be a user in Nigeria, you can be a user in Japan. How does that agreement affect your rights and your duties? Right? What does it mean to agree when you say I agree? Do you agree to the laws and regulations of the US, or do you agree to the laws and regulations of your country? And is that specified in those terms? So that's something I'm doing right now. Because I noticed that a lot of people who are complaining about privacy issues or being observed by the government, right? It's because they don't realize, like we said earlier, what role they play. So for example, WhatsApp is the most famous or most popular text messaging app in the world right now. 10 billion messages every day, okay? They have end-to-end encryption, which means besides the person you're talking to, nobody can have access to that content. Even WhatsApp can have access to that content, right? But the question came when they did the last update, which said, because I read it, the last update said, we're not going to ask what you're doing, we're not going to look at what you're doing, but we have an algorithm that's going to look at every word you're using so that we can use those words to suggest advertising to you on Facebook. Right?
Yeah.
So what, are you not reading or are you reading? What are you doing? So the German government rejected that law, right? That update. They said, we will not subject our citizens to this. So until you fix that or offer a different update for our country, you cannot use, our citizens can't use the app, pretty much. So Germany is the only country right now that doesn't have the latest version of WhatsApp. But the question now becomes, how many countries can afford to have a task force that does that, right? Look out for the consumer, look out for the citizens. How many of these countries can afford that? I don't think that many countries can, but then for the country who can afford it, why they're not doing it? Because advertising dollars is important, it's relevant. So I think that we have to take an active role in this and kind of look at on a daily basis, how much freedom am I giving away when I'm downloading these apps, right? You mentioned that sometimes the apps will suggest things. And that's because some of those apps that are free monetize your data. And that's how the application remains free. So understanding these things, because sometimes it's better to pay for the app, because if you pay for it, you can control it. But if it's free, that means they're making their money somehow, and that's usually for your data.
Excellent. Thank
So I'll give you the official term for what you're speaking of. It's called remarketing. And in my social media class, I take my students and we watch two videos. One is called Socialnomics. They do it every year. So instead of economics, you can go on YouTube and type in Socialnomics 2016. They may have a 2017 out. It's the most eye-opening, jaw-dropping video that puts what's happening in social media into real terms. For example, our attention span is less than a goldfish now, and that more people own smartphones and toothbrushes in the world. So it's quite an interesting video. But another one that I show is called Socialnomics. Another one I show my students is that there's this gentleman and he's looking at his Google Analytics and he's so proud. And he's explaining, why his blog is getting so much traffic, and he's walking through and he's telling you, the viewer, that he can see if you're a male, if you're a female, if your race. And he goes, I don't really know how they can do that, but they can tell your race. And then he says, and see right here, I can tell where everybody who visited my page stopped. And if you stop on that page, then he can have and pay for whatever that is. So if that was that shoe, that red dress, those golf clubs that you were looking at, he can pay Google to say remarket. They stopped at that, and I want you to go send that back to them until they buy it. So that's why you see it on your email. That's why suddenly it's on the bottom of your app. That's why it's suddenly at the top of your search engine, because they're remarketing to you, and that is what they pay for. And so we just have to be mindful is that when we are on the internet and you are signed in, everything you do is being tracked. Stay off that Google or I'd say.
Are there any more questions?
Good evening. My name is Benedict Ake. I'm an immigration lawyer. I'm very happy to have been here. I've learned a lot, and it's quite interesting. What worries me is the statement that Dr. Lamia said. Africa can never develop in a Western, using a Western language. That makes me very, very. I'm confused and frightened because with the coming of social media, more and more people are learning the Western language. They are exposed to the Western language because the prominent language in Africa should be Swahili, which does not even feature anywhere in the social media network. So right now, more people are getting to learn English than their own language, local languages. So you then means that Africa will never develop, because if Africa will never develop because they are using a foreign language, the social media is exposing them more to the westernized languages. But I believe that with the coming of social media, more people will be learning the language and are exposed to the Western world. So if development is having good roads, having good medical healthcare system, good transportation network, and all the like, except cultural destruction which we are facing, then I think social media is a welcome tool, because more people will be exposed to what is happening around the world, and they will be motivated to develop their own area and to look like the Western world, where people want to come, United States, for example. So don't you think that the social media and the fact that people are learning the Western language is instead beneficial to them than the fact that you mentioned here that you can never develop Africa using a colonial language?
All right, thank you. When Ali Mazuri stood at the podium in Ethiopia, at that time it was Organizational African Unity, which is now AU. He spoke in Swahili. And all the heads of states, they were all struggling to get the earphone, to get the translation in English or French. Nobody understood what he was doing. He was trying to send a message. You cannot use the language of your colonizer in order to advance your politics, your socio-cultural well-being. You can't do that. Why? Because languages, you struggle to translate it. You struggle to interpret. There are certain things that you cannot translate in the Western language from your own native language. Do you dream in Western language? No. When journalists go to the rural part of Africa and they want to get information, they cannot go and be interviewing the old folks. Why? Because the old folks they are not literate in English or French. So they say whatever thing they want to say. Most of the information that is coming from Africa, from CNN or BBC. Why? Because that is a language they want to send to the world. So that's why Sheikh Anta Diop, by the way, I'm quoted by Sheikh Anta Diop, who said no country can develop by using another person's language. And that is really true. And true, why? Because if you keep using another person's language, it means you need to master it. You need to keep struggling to learn the grammar. If they change, you change with them. You are like most of the authors in Britain, they said, those who write, African authors who write in English, they are like their junior brothers. So they will grill you for not using their language properly. That is the victim. That's the victimhood that African authors are. Most of Those authors like Ngugi who were writing and publishing with Heinemann, they were struggling to translate from the language to have it well written in grammar because they were rejecting their manuscript. You are not writing English properly. Your grammar is off the chart. So you are struggling, by the way, to first of all master the language of another person before you even think about your development. And of course, let's talk about development. There are all kinds of schools of thought about development. He talked about roads, third road, and I think Chinese, they have their own social media. They have their own social media. The way they write their own, you have to learn it in order to understand their own social media, using their own writing style. If you want to go to China now, you need to go to a China language institute before you even go there. So you send money to them. But if somebody's coming to Africa, no, you just speak the same American language and you can cope. So no need to spend any money to anywhere. That is the problem we are facing. By being the junior brothers of the West, by being inferior to the West because of their language and their culture, and we all dress like them. When we wear our clothes, we are primitive, and that's why they call us, we were the primitive tribes. That's what they said. But we could have still developed from below. That was what is happening again with China, as I was saying, with South Korea and the rest. That is why Sheikh Anta Diop said, and Africa is still suffering from that till today. They are confused, like I have a lawyer sitting there, whether it's common law or another. Should we follow Britain and common law? What is our own African law? You see where we are? We have a serious problem on that continent because we want to speak, write, do things in their own way. That is the dilemma we face. But of course, you were talking about social media. There's social media in Swahili. I have a Kenyan sitting there, a PhD student. They have a whole Swahili site. South Africa is coming out with their own notion, their own website. We don't have a URL in any African language. South Africa is coming about, go to any URL, any website. Where's the African website with content from Africa? None. South Africa is trying to do something about that. We cannot just be consumers. Ali Mazuri warned us that we import weapons of mass destruction instead of weapons of mass production in Africa. And that we are still following that. And when we import all the caterpillars from the West, when they get broken, we all want expatriates from the West to come and repair them for us. Is that development? And then they take all the wealth from us in order to repair that caterpillar. All the trains. The trains in most of the cities in Africa, they're on a sorry state because we cannot do anything about them. We imported them. We bought them from somebody who fixed it somewhere. So we have to look for our national budget in order to get experts to come and stay in 5-star hotels and spend months. Look at where the country budget is going to. No, these are issues we need to be wrestling with. That is where Sheikh Anta Diop, he is still being quoted up till today by authors. You cannot develop with another man's language. And I believe in that.
Contribution.
I've got one last question back here in the back.
I just wanted to differ with Harmony Bokta. Just came from his village in Cameroon, the author's village in Cameroon. I suppose the gentleman who posed the question before this answer came in is a colleague of mine. And I want to say this. We must distinguish between the development of self or human development, which is about, developing the innate capacities that you are born with in order to propel improvement for yourself and your society. It's not about physical development, which goes to industrial development. I can tell you, the Brits used child labor to carry out industrial development. When the Malaysians wanted to use children in their industry, they told them that is child abuse. And the Malaysians told them, you can keep the development you've made out of children working in the factories. In my own area of practice, the law, I can tell you for 30 years, one thing that I've identified is that the customary court in my village has one of the highest quotient of sense of justice in the judgments that are delivered. Because the presiding officers in the court did not even know English. They knew only the dialect. and they translated the common mores of the people of that community into the judgment. It is the clerk who took verbatim what the judges said and what the parties said in the dialect in English. The Western courts, I can tell you, they have given the worst judgments that you can imagine for the last 60 years. So it is not about how we're going to stop dressing in suits. If you go back to Genesis and just think about the way God created the world, he wasn't talking about a library like this, but that was a start point. And one of the things I would like to encourage is that, you know, the academics like yourself, you should connect with your colleagues in the African universities, because they are so dependent, more dependent than those students on what is on the internet. But they need to have a mind shift about what they teach and what they research and publish. This is very critical. And I'm thinking that we have been on strike for the last 6 months, no cuts, because of these language issues. And one of the things I suggested was that we should go to the traditional palaces and set up mediation centers and get women involved so that they can broker peace to conflictual parties in the dialect, which will be understood by all the stakeholders in the process. This was just a little contribution I wanted to make.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank our authors this evening, particularly Dr. Langman and Dr. Tyree. John Louise, Professor Minor, Dr. Mills, and Dr. Williams. I'm going to keep saying this so they can get used to this. They're newly minted. We want them to get used to that sound in their ear. And thank all of you for this rich conversation and discussion. Intersectionality. I'm always fascinated about that. We've talked today about globalization, cyberculture, social media, language, culture, identity, law, politics, our lifestyles, and how in this 21st century, all of this intersectionality, that is really what's happening. Those of us who travel around the globe, who move back and forth, we know that this is a fascinating phenomenon, and what we have to do is we have to continue having the conversation, and we have to continue researching and probing, and our new scholars, we're looking to them. I'm a little worried I'm supposed to write a chapter for Dr. Langley. I don't know how many times that's going to get edited. It seems like it's a little tough bar to get past these two, talking about sending the chapter back to you 14, 15, 16 times. As a member of the decadal community, I don't know if I have that much rewrite in me. But I am so pleased, and this is the reward for having this as my vocation, is to work with wonderful people like this and wonderful young graduate students and now scholars themselves, that we learn and that we interact with each other to push each other to understand that there is always something we should be thinking about and doing, and what big data is doing to us and our volunteer role in it. Because we're all party to that when we say, well, I'm just going to hit this, and then we go back and step back. And it's a very Western thought about our privacy and what we are giving away, and we have to be careful because we are participating in it. I'm waiting to get my new phone. So it's those types of things. So thank you. And thank you, Dr. Reitharp, as our Associate Dean for Research and Academic Affairs. She keeps us pushing and keeping our scholarship and research at the forefront. And you do the same by making all of us out here who do this say, you need to keep turning it over and over and over again to make us better understand the world around us. So I thank you. We welcome you. We will be back again next year. We hold this every year. This is our 4th year, and we're looking forward to our 5th annual Night with the Authors. Thank you.